There are 54 nations that make up Africa. Each of these countries has its own culture, tribes, traditions, and history. That being said, there are several commonalities shared by literature that came from all over the continent. The concept of African literature can be confusing. Some authors believe that African literature can only be written in African languages. Others claim that African literature can be composed in any language as long as it is written by African writers. In this lesson, we'll narrow our focus to the broader history and characteristics of African literature in general.
African literature dates back thousands of years to ancient Egypt and hieroglyphics, or writing which uses pictures to represent words. These ancient Egyptian beginnings led to Arabic poetry, which spread during the Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century, and Western Africa in the 9th century. These African and Arabic cultures continued to blend with the European culture and literature to form a unique literary form. African experienced several hardships in its long history, which left an impact on its literature themes. One problem that led to many others is colonization. Colonization has led to slavery. Millions of Africans have been enslaved and sent to Western countries from the 16th to the 19th centuries. This spread of African people, mostly against their will, is called the African diaspora. Characteristics of African literature. Slaves' narratives. This is written by fugitive slaves about their lives in the South and often after escaping from freedom. Protest against colonization. African writers aimed at revealing the social evils of colonial rule and to encourage a sense of African. Also, West African writers used their writings to speak out enslavement and for racial equality. They argued against colonial stereotypes of Africans as primitive, savage, and lacking distinctive cultural and political systems of their own. Calls for independence. Independence campaigns were led by nationalist leaders with charismatic personalities and great intellectual ability. African pride. This creates African identities that promote the idea of a cultural movement of African literary renaissance. Hope for the future. It focuses on the literature of hope and despair over the betrayal of the goals of liberation struggles in Africa. History and characteristics of Philippine literature. Philippine literature uses nature, peace, and highlight of emotion as a theme. Philippine literature can be categorized in three: prehistory, pre-colonial, and present. Pre-Hispanic or prehistory Philippine literature was actually epics passed on from generation to generation. Originally through an oral tradition, Philippine colonization began when Spanish explorer Miguel Lopez de Legazpi arrived from Mexico in 1565. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines was officially recognized by United States as an independent nation through the Treaty of Manila. During the presidency of Manuel Rojas, this period was recognized as the post-colonial period, thus giving birth to the post-colonial literature. The post-colonial literature covered a literary period typified by experimentation with a new language, particularly the forms and imagery that are offered by English and American literature. In modern or present literature, Filipino writers continue to write poetry, short stories, novelas, novels, and essays, whether these are socially committed, gender or ethnic related, or are personal in intention or not.
Similarities. Both Africa and the Philippines have the same literature theme regarding the hardship of their battle against the colonizers. When the Spanish people colonized the Philippines, slavery was catastrophic against Filipinos' will. Same as the Africans when Europeans colonized them. They were both conquered because of rich resources. The colonizer status kept rising while the natives cannot do anything but endure the hardship they've gone through. Both works of literature also felt a sense of discrimination because of inferiority. Back in the day, the African people were labeled by the colonizers as primitive and savage. because of the lacking of distinctive cultural and political system. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the Filipinos were labeled as poor and inferior because of the lack of innovation compared to the colonizers.
3.
Differences. Philippine literature is the literature associated with the Philippines and include the legends of the prehistory and the Philippines' colonial legacy. Pre-Hispanic Philippine literature were actually epics passed on from generation to generation. Originally, through oral tradition, while African literature, literary works of the African continent. African literature consists of a body work in different languages and various genres, ranging from oral and written literature in colonial language, French, Portuguese, and English.
In our reflection, we've learned that literature carries the tradition and represents the country. Philippine literature has rich emotion and carries cultural values. Having our own literature represent us to other countries, making them recognize us as a person who value culture and tradition. Also, literature allows us to step back in time and learn about the earth from the one who walked before us. In that way, other countries and our community will know our history, where we came from, and who we are. In conclusion, literature gives us identity, making us different from the rest. That's it for our presentation. Thank you.